And now it's my pleasure to introduce our guest speaker today. Elizabeth V. Warren has served on the Board of Trustees of the American Folk Art Museum since 2007 and was elected president in 2019. Previously, she was curator at the museum. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our guest speaker today. And Elizabeth V. Warren has served on the Board of Trustees of the American Ms. Warren has organized a number of critically acclaimed exhibitions for the museum, many of which have been accompanied by books, including Infinite Variety, 3 Centuries of Red and White Quilts, published in 2011, The Perfect Game, America Looks at Baseball, 2003-2004, and Made in New York City, The Business of Folk Art, 2019. She is also a member and past president of the American Folk Art Society. After graduating with an A.B. from Bryn Mawr College, where Ms. Warren currently serves on the Board of Trustees, she was a journalist at House Beautiful, covering the home furnishings market as well as arts and antiques. She received her MA from New York University in Folk Art Studies. And Elizabeth, we're so excited to have you here. We're thrilled to be producing kind of our version of the Infinite Variety show with the amazing Joanna S. Rose collection. And we're so excited to hear more about it. So everyone, help me welcome Elizabeth Warren.
Thank you so much, Carolyn. It is absolutely my pleasure. It was always my dream, as well as the Rose family's dream, that Infinite Variety did not die when we closed it at the Armory, but that in some form it could continue. And I'm really thrilled that you've been able to take that baton and run with it.
Oh, as are we.
It's
Elizabeth, I'm sorry to interrupt, but before we get going too far, I do want to remind people, if you have questions for Elizabeth, please use the Q&A function on your computer. We'll save the chat for any welcomes and hellos, but that Q&A. And we have Haley Butler with us, who's behind the scenes. Hi, Haley. She's going to be answering some questions as we go along. We may ask Elizabeth to take a moment and take a question or two, and then we'll come back to some of those questions at the end of the program. Thanks, everybody.
So I was able to find the PowerPoint and the slides back from 2011. Unfortunately, I couldn't find the script that I wrote to go with it. So we're just gonna have fun today. We're just gonna play it by ear. And of course, this was everybody's favorite quilts, called Kaleidoscope or whatever you wanted to call it, with sort of the butterflies at the corners, very Art Nouveau, but also, honestly, I will admit, I do not sew. I do not quilt. So I study these quilts as works of art. I am very impressed by the amount of, for one thing, the amount of math that goes into making a quilt. I could never, ever handle, but I study these as works of art. So I see Art Nouveau influence in this, and the influence of the invention of the kaleidoscope. And so I just want to give you a little bit of background about the red and white quilts and why they are and why they became so popular. So we can go to the next slide. The whole project started because I knew Joanna Rose because we are alumni of the same college, and she was 20 years ahead of me. So that meant that we were at reunion at the same time. So many years ago, I knew she had done this exhibition at Bryn Mawr of a few of her red and white quilts. This is one of the quilts that was on part of that exhibition. And I invited her to come speak at a program the Folk Art Museum, the American Folk Art Museum in New York, was doing on collecting textiles. And she showed up with one of the most beautiful album quilts, not a red and white quilt, but an album quilt that I've ever seen. And I wouldn't let it go. I just kept contacting her at different times saying, you ready to give us that quilt yet? And then one day out of the blue, you want to move on, I did get a call from Joanna saying that she wanted to do an exhibition of her red and white quilts, which she'd been collecting for a long time. She had no clue how many she had. She told us there could be as many as 800 of them.
Wow.
So the first thing we did was get a photographer to start taking pictures of some of the quilts. And that was the fabulous Gavin Ashworth, who's one of the best antiques photographers in the game. He took some snapshots, some nice photographs. We sent it to a number of designers and asked them to submit a proposal. Again, not knowing how many quilts we were dealing with. So this is not a photograph. This is the rendering that was submitted by Think Design of New York, Tom Hennis Inc. And this just blew everyone away. It was a unanimous choice right away to use them. And the center of it is meant to recreate the feeling of a quilting circle, a quilting bee, or people coming together to make quilts. And as you see, that circular image is repeated over and over again in the exhibition. And we'll have some actual photographs of it later on, but this was just their rendering. And everybody thinks this is a photograph of the real exhibition, but it's not. So you can understand why they won that beauty contest. It was amazing. So we can move on. This is Gavin and a group of us from the museum. We photographed the quilts in Joanna's apartment. It was a marathon. We did it in two halves, one half in the spring, I guess, of 2010, then in the fall and that's how we got a count. It was by photographing them. And when those were done, we knew we had 653 quilts to work with. You probably got more because Joanna did not stop buying. When we finally had to tell her, no more. We cannot incorporate any more into this design. But there is Gavin at the front and those of us at the museum. That's when we measured each one. We got to see what they were up close. And that was how we started the whole process. So we can move on.
Elizabeth, a quick question. Somebody wants to know, do you remember how they were, how Joanna was storing the quilts in her house?
She was storing them in her summer house in Long Island. I've never saw it. Carolyn, I think you may have seen it. We were told they were in a cedar closet, but I can't swear to that. But she really did not know what she had. However, I do want to point out that Joanna had one of the best memories of anyone I've ever met. And she swore to me that no two quilts were alike, that she could keep in her mind what each one of these quilts was, so she never repeated anything. They'll be close, but not the same. So this is just to show you that when we talk about turkey red, we're not talking about turkeys. So go on. This is an ad from a newspaper from 1788 that tells you how long ago this dye was perfected. This is what makes these quilts possible, was the discovery of a formula to make turkey red dye that was amazingly color fast. Unlike all the other reds at the time, it didn't fade, it didn't run, but the process to make it was really difficult, lengthy, and expensive. So it was originally developed in the Mediterranean area, which is why it's called Turkey. That was just a common term for the Mediterranean lands at the time. And then some travelers were able to bring it back to France, and then from France to England, and here, Manchester, England, where those wool and cotton mills were, and that's where they began to dye the fabrics that we saw here in the United States. So we can move on. And this is just to show you, yes, people are still making that kind of dye. And this is a later advertisement by the time the dye, a synthetic version of the dye is developed, but it's also a little more expensive. It was more expensive than other dyes. And really, the only color fast fabrics you could rely on at this time were blues made from indigo or the red. And again, they're using the turkey, but we can move on. So these are just, we can go through these pretty quickly. It's just to show you all the different types of quilts designs that were made using the red and white patterns. They were, the earliest that we saw were probably from the mid-19th century, and then up until the present day. But the majority, based on those that we had firm dates on, we can conclude that most of the turkey red quilts were made between 1890 and 1910. We spread that to go 1880 to 1920, but that's pretty much, if you look in the book, if a quilt does not have a date on it, we assume it was made during that period. So we can keep just going through some of these. They go, you know, from simple stripes to really complex piecing and applique work. Next. You know, to me, some are pictorials, all the different ways that you can combine simple geometric patterns like diamonds. Again, as someone who can't sew, I am just amazed by what the imagination will do. And the quilting on the quilts varies as well. You can see these two have been really elaborately stitched to bind the 3 layers of the quilt together. So next, pictorial quilts, houses, mariner's compass. And I'll just say that we decided that unless a quilt was handed down with a specific name from the maker, who knows what they were called? It could have been a name given by the dealer who sold it to the collector, or I mean, I went through every single one of the receipts that Joanna had from when she originally bought these quilts. And then I tried to match up the receipt, which would just say like red and white compass quilt, with which was the actual one it's referring to. Many times I got lucky, sometimes we just had to guess, but you'll see many varieties of the same patterns continuing. So move on. Oh, I mean, log cabin variation. You know, what you even call this, I don't know. It's just, I think I just picked what were my favorites to put in here. And so nothing more technical than that. So we'll move on. word quilts. These are definitely outstanding. This is the Lord's Prayer. We found one of the things that I've noticed, and that perhaps Carolyn, you have as well, quilts with words on them, pieced letters, tend to be most common in New York State. We don't know why, but it seemed to have been a fad at some time there. And clearly this is earlier than some of the others. The tan lines, I would bet, were green, and that was a color that did fade a lot. So while the red has held up really well here, the green is gone. So
Elizabeth, quick question. Do you know anything about the history of these ends, the backwards ends, if that has anything to do with pattern or anything like that?
I don't. My guess is that they probably wrote their ends that way as well. So if they're copying what was written, that's what would come up.
Yeah.
So we can move on to, here's another great one. It took me a long time looking at this quilt to figure out what it was. And what they are 4-letter names. Sometimes they don't quite fit in 4 letters, but they've made them fit. Here they are, hexagons. So you've got Bert, let's see, Mina, Ella, Omer, Sally. This I liked. It's I think it's supposed to be Olive. I think Sally's missing an L, Alva, but it's just remarkable. So next ones. These are just more of my favorite ones that I managed to pull out. I'm trying to get to another word quilt. See if we get there. Nope. No, simple, complex, it varies. Circles, we're doing all the geometric patterns that are possible once you start making pieced quilts. So move on. This one is a, what do you call it? If you look at the red squares, you see like a cross like that. If you look at the white, you see a fleur-de-lis. So it's really, I can't even begin to think how this was laid out and made. It's 2 patterns in one. It's a trompe-l'oeil, I guess you'd call it, depending on what color you're looking at. Next. We also had a lot of appliques. A lot of them are made like you did as a little child, cutting out the star snowflakes out of paper. Move on. And there you see how some of these patterns were developed for the applique. Just it's very much related to the Schnarrenschnitte, which is a Pennsylvania German. You can move on. You'll see that's a stunning one. But this is a technique that's very similar to the scissor cutting that was done by the Germanic people who lived in Pennsylvania, starting in the 18th century. Move on. And that's an example of a paper cut. And you can see how related that is to what's being done in the quilt designs. These things, I firmly believe that all decorative arts are related. Nothing comes out of nowhere. There's inspiration, there's, you change techniques depending on what's inspiring you. And so you can see relationships between all the decorative arts. So move on. And here's another similar with hearts, also an applique. Next. And you all know of Hawaiian pattern quilts, Hawaiian applique. These, though, were made in New York State. And we know that because this is, she very nicely said where she was, and Wallkill of Orange County, and when, February 18th, 1858. And then she signed her name. And that's something you should all do when you are making your quilts, because 100 years from now, it's going to be tough otherwise. And this is a pattern that's very common. The museum has a blue and white example, but these sort of funny trees, willow trees, we call them, were also made frequently in New York State. So next. This is how the Hawaiian patterns would have been cut out and then used as a transfer, or how they would get their appliques. Next. And it is on a full whole cloth quilt, you could say. The design takes up the entire quilt front. Next. It's another one, and this one probably was made in Ohio, in Hawaii, since it says Aloha on it. Next. Sampler appliques. These are the most fun to research because you've got all these different patterns on it. Sometimes they were sold, sometimes people invented them themselves. This one is really interesting because of that mortar and pestle there, and makes me think it was made for a druggist or someone preparing home remedies. Next. These, I feel like I'm a member of this family. Joanna had bought these quilts separately. They had never been seen together. When I saw them, I knew immediately it had to be the same quilt maker. In this one, she signs her name, Lavinia Rose, where she is, Cortlandville, New York, 1856. This one I didn't think was signed until it was hanging in the armory, and I could get really close to it, and there is a pen inscription at the bottom with her name, Lavinia Rose. So then I tried to find out who Daniel, all these people are, and it got a little complicated because I believe Daniel was was a son of Lavinia's husband's first wife. And then Charles and Cornelia, I couldn't find a Cornelia, but they had a daughter who was Abigail Cornelia, and I think she was probably just known by her middle name. So they're definitely related. They're the same person, but acquired from two different dealers at two different times. And it took hanging them in the armory to know they were related. Wow. So next. Baskets, appliqued and pieced. Next. Of course, red and white becomes popular again with those synthetic dyes when we have a quilt revival. And you can see here's a red and white quilt being made on the cover of Needlecraft magazine in 1928. And I have to tell you, I have looked at almost every issue of Needlecraft magazine. And in order to do it back at that time, I had to make an appointment at the Public Library Annex, which was only open on Thursday afternoons by appointment. So I had a standing appointment Thursday afternoons at the library. So next, move on. These are quilt revivals. You have probably made from kits or patterns, but the red and white stays popular. Next. Also all the variations of the wedding ring, whether it's pickled dish or double wedding ring. I think it's really takes on a different dimension when it's just in two colors. Next. And of course, also available in the from the late 19th to in the early 20th century, you could buy patterns, and these on the right are what was known as penny squares. You could buy, I think, 50 for 50 cents or 5 cents each. And then you just transfer on the design. This was made definitely for the 1893 exposition, I think, which was in Buffalo. And you have all the things that you also find on the crazy quilts, like sort of Kate Greenaway figures. And I think one of them has William McKinley on it. So next. Here's another, oh, this is the one that was the 1893 exposition. And these are the patterns that were used. So next. And this one is fabulous because it's all made out of recycled flour bags in red and white. I don't know. I think someone just took these bags, sort of dyed out as much of the color and then embroidered over it to make the monograms come through. Next. Signature quilts, fundraisers, gifts. This one was particularly interesting to me because after the show closed, we got a letter from someone who recognized a woman in Nova Scotia, recognized her great-grandfather's name on this and wrote to us about it. So next. Red Cross, obviously, particularly suited to red and white. Next. And this was a Red Cross fundraising quilt. It says Newburgh Chapter, American Red Cross. And again, they probably sold squares in this to raise money for the Red Cross at the time. Next. This is just to show you that by the 1970s, when you have American Country Revival, red and white still being made. So Joanna wanted to include everything that was red and white. So this was made, I think, in the 1970s or 80s, and was available by mail order catalog or and I believe it was made in China. Next. This is just an example of some of the stuff we had available for sale at the exposition, at the armory. These are magnets made up of some of the different patterns from the quilts. Next. That's the only advertising we had was by word of mouth and by hanging these banners up on some light posts on the Upper East Side of New York. But somehow people found us. We got, I forget, like 26,000 people in 6 days. It was a happening, let's put it that way. Next.
Elizabeth and Carolyn, let me just ask a quick question from the chat. You know, you just showed us a bunch of these amazing quilts, and both of you guys have looked at the collection. Did you notice that any were more machine quilted, or were they hand quilted? Did you ever get a sense of which one, if there were more hand quilted ones or machine quilted?
Carolyn, I'm going to throw that to you.
Well, we did notice that, and it's really typical of this late, as Elizabeth said, this 1880 to 1920 period. We saw a lot of machine piecing, and we saw mostly hand quilting, but we did have exceptions. There were machine applique, there was some machine quilting. Once women got the sewing machine, they really did try to incorporate it in any way that they could. But I'd say the bulk of them are hand quilted.
That was my feeling, but I wouldn't swear to anything. So next. And this is Dan and Joanna Rose, who I'm sure you all know passed away last November. But this was at the actual opening of the exhibition. And I love, she put a red and white square on the front of her cape there.
And Elizabeth, this was a special occasion. Can you tell us a little bit more about how it came about between
Sure.
her and Daniel?
Sure. This was Joanna's, when Daniel asked her what she wanted for her 80th birthday, she said something that no one has ever seen before. And she wanted to take all her red and white quilts and display them. So she called me after we had and said she had this idea. And I went to her apartment with Stacy Hollander, who was the curator of the museum at the time. And again, as I said, she had no idea how many she had, but she said she wanted to display them all. And we came back, the next meeting, we had a number of possible venues where she could do this. And she said no to all of them. And then I said, but Joanna, there's only one place in New York that's big enough for what you're talking about, and that's the Armory. And she said, yes, and here are the dates it's available. She had already come to that decision, checked it out, and found out when it could be done. And so we had a deadline that we had to work towards then, because we could only rent it, I think it was 7 days, and it took us 2 days to get this whole thing up. So it was her gift, and she was absolutely adamant that there was to be no admission charged. And I see Deborah Bingham is on here as well, Joanna's niece and a quilter. So Deborah was very helpful through the whole process as well. And so that's what we did, what she wanted. It was, and I have to say that the design team was we had regular meetings. At every meeting, the different teams were growing in size. We started from a designer and a manager at Think. By the end, I think we had about 8 to 10 people there involved. We started with Stacy and me at the museum. By the end, the entire staff was involved, and everybody who worked for or was related to Joanna also got involved, including one of her sons who developed an app that you could put on your iPad and get close-up views of all the quilts. And then he had the iPads available at the Armory so people could borrow them. I mean, it was a family affair and a multi-organizational event, let's put it that way. I think we just have pictures of the installation left. Yeah, so if you were there, you know, it was totally a happening. It was, it was compared to the gates that Christo and John Claude had done in New York in like 2005, where they draped Central Park in orange banners. This was the red and white version of that. We had cell phone tours. We had only the quilts that are shown up close had descriptions of them and a little bit of a chat, but everything is included in the book. So, and we kept saying to everyone, you know, just wait, just wait. There was no way in the time that we had that we could produce the book. In fact, in this picture, if you look on the lower right, you'll see the Charles and Cornelia quilt, and over on the circle to the right of that, at the very edge, is the other quilt made by Lavinia. And honestly, it was seeing the two of them up there that I knew they were related. Okay,
Wow.
Next. Just some idea. There were kids running around in these circles, dancing. Everybody was just happy. We had stocked a store. I have to tell you, at the end of the first day, we were sold out. And our shop manager had to go scrounge. We had new bags made, tote bags made overnight. Any merchandise she could find that had anything to do with red and white was brought in. We had a cafe in the back, so you didn't have to leave. You can stay and have lunch. It was, and some people besides me were there every day. It was just,
There was a lot to see.
yeah, yeah. Next.
Elizabeth, a popular question right now is, will the book ever be reprinted?
You know, Carolyn raised that issue with me. I passed it on to the museum, and they are looking into what it would take to do that. It's, you know, it has to be, the publisher has to agree, and I think it's a no-brainer. It should be, because it can never go out of date. And it's, but meanwhile, it was a far bigger thing than we ever knew. Joanna also insisted that we print a paperback edition, because she said the quilt books are too heavy. She doesn't like to carry them around. And we knew this was going to be a big book. So we did it in hardcover and paperback.
And while we're looking at these images, you mentioned earlier that you had 2 days
Yes.
to prep this. Were you there for that? Can you tell us a little bit about that, and if it was potentially hectic or what it was like?
It was practically 24 hours round the clock. We had, I mean, there's carpet in each of these circles. I mean, everything was laid out ahead of time to the 1/4 inch. Each of these quilts is backed by another quilt of the same size or very close to the same size. So math was really involved. So the only way we could get all of them in was to double hang them. The rugs that you see, that was by, we called in, I forget the name of those inexpensive flooring companies that guarantee they can put in your rugs or carpeting in a day, and they did. But we had crews of people doing the lighting, people doing the hanging. These were all assembled down on the floor and then pulled up to the ceiling. So
Wow.
like doing a chandelier down at the bottom and then pulling up.
Wow.
I don't know if we have another view or if that's
I
it.
think we've got one more. Yeah.
There you go. This wall, there was some lighting issue there, so we had to work on that, but it eventually came back. And in the back there, you see that's where the cafe was. They also sold out of food very quickly. And you can see people brought their children. They came, they sat, they didn't move. And it was just, it was an event. And yes, and we do have, the designers did do a time-lapse photography so that you could watch the whole thing coming together. I don't know if it's on their website or if it's even still available, but it was done. And we tried to document this every way we could. And we did always hope that we could recreate it somewhere. But Carolyn, that's now your problem.
Well, as a matter, do you
I
have
was
another
gonna
question
ask-
for us, Haley?
I was gonna ask one question about Joanna's collecting, and then Carolyn, if you could tell us a little bit about the exhibition up currently. But do either of you know how Joanna started collecting red and white quilts, and you know, if these were the only kinds of quilts she collected, or
Oh,
if she
no.
kind of morphed over time, maybe?
I don't know what drew her into the red and white. She collected many quilts of many different colors. And that's not all she collected. She had collections of collections. I first borrowed, way back when I was curating an exhibition in the 80s, I borrowed some scrimshaw from her. So she had a collection of scrimshaw. She had silver Taurus caps. I forget what they're called. She had books, cookbooks, an entire apartment full of cookbooks, and says she didn't cook. I don't know. And it may be red and white went with the rose name. I don't know, but Deborah can probably let you know.
Well, yes, and we do have, so when we got the collection, the first thing we wanted to do is put up an exhibition, and we wanted it to be reminiscent of Infinite Variety. So I went to our designer and I said, can we do this circular helix approach? And even with our ceilings being 16 foot tall, we couldn't even hang, it would be maybe 3 sets of quilts. So I do have a couple of images now from our show. Well, one more there. Oh, look at that. You know what strikes me about these photos you're showing, Elizabeth, is not only is the lighting so beautiful, but the lighting on the floor, even the shadows it casts and the way they created other kind of light.
I will say we called in, or the designers called in people they knew from Broadway. It was theatrical lighting and rigging, and these are people who are used to building sets and lighting on Broadway. So we got that little pizzazz in there too.
That was a brilliant idea, because yes, who would know better?
Yeah.
So here we are now in our exhibition, and out of the 650 some quilts, we're able to show 81 in our exhibition, which is the largest exhibition we've done. So we did some creative ways of showing the quilts. I think I've got just a couple more images here.
Oh, beautiful.
we really did try to replicate a lot of the touches. So we've done some vertical racks to bring the eye up. We've done an entire wall of our gallery just in what we call kind of a jumble of quilts, again, adding that height. And then we use these X shapes to do the double-sided hanging like you all did. And I have to say, Elizabeth, that was tough. And I've got 16 of those set up that way. And you all had to put all of those together back to back. That is a real challenge in itself.
Yep.
It's a beautiful show. So I encourage people to come. It's up throughout the summer. So we've got it up for a long stretch here. And it's going to be really, I think, one of our favorite, just judging by all of the reaction that we've had on social media. What I love about it, Elizabeth, though, is the responses that we're getting are people saying, I was there, or I saw the book, or it was such an incredible event and something that people are just so excited to kind of revisit it because it had such an impact on them.
Yeah. I think it sparked a little quilt revival too.
I think it did. I think it really did. And I think Joanna was just such an amazing force. You know, we use this quote that I think we took from the book where she says she wasn't really a collector. She was a treasure hunter. She
Right.
just bought what she loved.
Mhm.
And so she didn't really get too head up in the background, the history of it. But if she
Right.
liked the quilt, she added it to her collection.
Right. She was very happy for me to do the research on the history of it.
I bet she was. And I do hope that the book can get republished because you all did a great job in the history of it and the whole experience of the design. I believe at one point I read that there were 1,000 people per hour coming in on the first few days because it was such a phenomenon.
Yeah. Yeah. Who knew?
Who knew? But, you know, the question that I had as we were putting up the show, and maybe you can contribute it to this, Elizabeth, is that so many of these quilts are made with solid colored fabrics. There's very few prints in
Right.
the exhibition. So
Right.
why do you think that was something that those makers chose?
I think just to get the fullest punch, the best impact would be, you know, not diluting that red at all with a pattern. There were a few places where we found patterns, but not many. And I think probably, you know, I always have felt that fabrics for these kinds of quilts were bought specially. They weren't just frags that were left around. So I think if they knew they wanted to make a red and white quilt, they bought red fabric.
And you're right, it does have such an impact when you have that really rich, solid color. Well, it is really lovely. And it's been so great to have you here today, Elizabeth. Haley, do we have any other questions that we should ask Elizabeth before we move on to a little announcement?
There are quite a few questions about specific quilts, but I do encourage everybody you can go onto the IQM website. The red and white quilts are uploaded for you to view individually. So you might be able to get some more information and zoom in on those quilts that you're particularly interested in on our website, which is a great feature that we have. And I believe we're going to be doing a virtual exhibit too. We'll be uploading that so you can kind of walk through the museum if you can't make it here in Nebraska.
Yes, I think Camilo, our exhibition curator, said Friday the virtual tour will go up on our website. And that does give you an opportunity to really kind of stand in the space and see all the quilts. But I do think that if there are questions about how a quilt was made, you know, I thought one of the most interesting things as we were looking at these quilts is how many of them have these really complex piece designs where, for example, if you're looking for the block on some of these quilts, it's really hard to know what the individual block is because the designs kind of meet and overlap with each other. And that complicated design, I think, was so interesting as well. And I think that's kind of a product of the 20th century and all of the geometric ways that patterns could be put together.
Yeah. And I was lucky enough when we put the book together to work with Maggie Gordon, who was a quilter and had a different and a quilt book editor, and she had a better handle on how these were made than I did. So she helped me divide everything up into categories. I mean, there are categories, people can disagree, but we had to organize this somehow.
I can't even imagine, Elizabeth, 650 quilts. That is an incredible job. And we
I
are
have
so
pictures.
thrilled to just
I'll have to
maintain
send
that
you-
group together.
I'll have to send you a picture. I've got of me on the floor with all these, with Xeroxes of each quilt and the cat sitting on them, you know, trying to help me to figure it out.
Wow. I'm thrilled. I'm thrilled that it is living on here at the International Quilt Museum and that we're going to keep these quilts together. I think that's a really
Right.
important event in our quilt history that
Yep.
is just going to get better with time, just better and better.
So we are planning sometime next spring. I'm sorry, I don't know the dates. At the American Folk Art Museum in New York, we will be having an exhibition of quilts in our permanent collection. So go to Nebraska now, and then next year come to New York City.
Perfect.
see
I
the-
love that. A great opportunity for us.
Yep.
Well, thank you, Elizabeth. We have a little announcement we want to go to now. And so we have Leslie Levy, the Executive Director here at the International Quilt Museum, who's joining us to talk about another opportunity for quilters. So Leslie, I'm going to ask you to go ahead and take over now.
Great, thank you. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We were so excited to bring you this textile talk and to have Elizabeth join us. We all feel so awesome now having been able to listen to Elizabeth and see those gorgeous photos that I feel like I'm kind of bringing us down a little bit. But hopefully, as quilters and lovers of color and textiles and fabric, the Quilt Museum, I belong to our local Rotary Club, and 3 weeks ago I was at Rotary, and we had the good fortune to have a Zoom call with a sister Rotary Club in the Ukraine. And she was talking to us about what they were experiencing in real time. And as you can imagine, it was incredibly poignant. It was amazing to listen to her and to hear her story. And she has visited us before. So this was somebody that we knew. And somebody at my table who's also a supporter and a member of the Quilt Museum asked me if the Quilt Museum had any quilts from the Ukraine. And I said, no, we don't. And he said, there, as an international museum, it feels like we should have that and we should be able to do something. And I said, I agree completely. So I came back to the office and I talked to the team here, and we thought it would be really fun to partner with Rotary International and to create a little mini quilt challenge. We have 4 sunflower quilts in our permanent collection, and we thought it would be fun to do a quilt challenge, a 16 by 16 inch quilt challenge. We have 4 sunflower quilts to inspire you. The link is on this page, and then we will also share it. It's on our website. We will also put it in the chat. But we're going to have people send in their 16-inch blocks, and then we're going to auction them. And we're going to have this auction in June, and all the money that is raised, we will donate to Rotary International. There are 111 Rotary clubs in the Ukraine. And so we will be working to make sure that we get that money over. We know that there's a great need and it will last for a long time. And so we know quilters have huge hearts and they love to make things and they love to participate. And so I'm letting all of you know about our quilt challenge. And if you have the time and the inspiration and want to join us, we would be absolutely honored to have that and to have you join us. And then we will have the auction, and we will be announcing that on our social media and on our website, and you guys can watch it and participate. And then we'll happily report back the amount of money that we were able to raise and send over. So anyway, if you have any questions, please let us know. We're just excited. We already have 9 that have been sent in, people, and we just went live with this last week. So anyway, we're excited, and we hope that you can join us. So anyway.
It's a great idea. And I hope that people will submit quilts. You can get more information on our website. We have the link up here on the slide, and I believe Haley's going to post it on the Q&A as well. So you can click on that. It will take you to those inspiration quilts that you can take a look at and use those as a basis for your inspiration. But really, we're looking for the sunflower, the symbol of Ukraine, in any way that you can share it. So please do help us out. And what a great thing to, quilters share and have always supported causes. So I think it's great that we can support this cause as well.
I put the link in the
Thank
I
you,
put the link in
Carolyn.
the chat.
What, Haley?
I put the link in the chat, and there's a banner on our front page of our website. If you don't get the link, you'll be able to see it almost immediately when you go to the website. So it should be an easy find.
Thank you so much. And Carolyn, I'm going to turn it back to you so you can thank our sponsors.
Thank you all. Thank you. I can't believe another hour has flown by. Thank you so much, Elizabeth, for being with us today. And I again want to thank our wonderful sponsors who make the Textile Talks happen for us every week. Make sure you are getting those emails and have signed up so that you get the notification of each one of these different programs as we move forward. We're coming up very soon on our 100th Textile Talk. Isn't that amazing? Of course, these are all recorded. They are posted online. You can get more information on that as well. So please, if you've missed anything, you can go back and check them out, or you can listen over again too. So thank you everyone for being with us today. We appreciate it, and we will look forward to seeing you soon, and hopefully seeing you here at the International Quilt Museum. Thank you so much, everyone.